good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining Georgetown's initiative on Catholic social thought and public life for this live stream public dialogue on faith, politics, and policy in 2022, where we ask the question, what is a faithful agenda now? We are so grateful to have so many folks joining us. I think the last number I saw was almost 1,600 people who had RSVP'd here from around the country, even around the world. You're joining us on YouTube and Twitter, and you can share your thoughts on social media using hashtag FaithfulAgenda22 and by tagging the initiative at GUCST Public Life. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions. You'll see the email on the bottom, send them there, and we'll try and get them to the panelists. 2021 was a rough year. For the initiative, it was a strange year in that there was so much loss and division and so many challenges, but for us, it was a great opportunity to advance our mission. I think we had 30 dialogues and almost 45,000 people. So there is a hunger for this kind of conversation, evidence for the turnout for this. In our last few dialogues, we have focused to a great extent on the Catholic community and some of the challenges we face, some of the controversies we face. Today, we're trying to broaden the circle to the larger Christian community. One thing to remind ourselves, I read like you do, I'm a parent and grandparent, about the number of people who attach themselves to religious institutions is going down, and faith, the nuns, the NONES. It's still true that the largest, perhaps certainly one of the largest constituencies in American public life are Christians. And that's true of both parties. It's true in every part of the country. So what we do, for good or ill, has a lot to do whether we advance the common good or undermine it. 2022 is a new year, but we face the same challenges, in some ways even worse. Still, the loss, the cost, the divisions of COVID. We've had setbacks on Build Back Better and its help for children and families, on voting rights. We're awaiting a Supreme Court nominee and a decision on abortion. A lot of us marched for life a few weeks ago. There is a wide range of religious voices and institutions trying to shape the choices of the Biden administration and the debate and the decisions of Congress. So we're asking, what is a faithful agenda now? To be honest, sometimes to me, it's not clear what is in more trouble, our politics or our religious communities. Both seem beset by divisions, by frustration, by, in some ways, cynicism even. That's a terrible thing to say. We're trying to live our faith in wounded churches and a polarized nation. And the divisions and polarization in public life, in my experience, is coming into religious life, exacerbating our differences and destroying our unity. A key question for me and for our panel is, does our faith shape our politics, or is it the other way around? Is politics becoming a new religion with gods of its own making, rigid orthodoxies, its own commandments, secular sins, public liturgies, its own saints and satans, and even excommunication? Does faith help us solve our problems, or does it make them worse? Is it building up the common good or tearing us apart? So we're asking, how do religious voters' values and institutions shape the debate of this year, and what role might they play in this coming election? And to do that, we have a remarkable group of 4 leaders. I'm very sorry to say I just heard from Wheaton. Our friend, Dr. Russell Moore, has come down with COVID, and he had hoped to join us anyway. but he's not able to, and that's a big loss for us. Please keep him and his family in your prayers. We do have with us four remarkable people. Angela Espada is the executive director of the Indiana Catholic Conference, which advocates for Catholic principles and policies in the state of Indiana. She has an illustrious career in higher education in Indiana. Ruth Graham is based in Dallas, and she's a national correspondent covering faith and values, religion for the New York Times. She graduated from Wheaton and previously worked at Slate. Reverend Alvin Herring is the executive director of Faith in Action, the largest grassroots faith-based organizing network in the United States. He's a Christian minister. He served at the Kellogg Foundation and the University of Louisville. And Jim Wallace, I'm happy to announce, is the first chair in Faith and Justice, and he's leader of the Center on Faith and Justice in the McCourt School of Public Policy here at Georgetown. He's also, the founder of Sojourners, and he's co-chair of the Circle of Protection, which is doing great work. So thank you for joining us. I'd like to begin by asking each of you, starting with Ruth. Ruth is here as a reporter, not an advocate. So in each case, we'll lead with her. What is the most important or least understood factor in assessing the role of faith in politics and policy as we gather 1 year after the Biden administration and 10 months before the midterm elections? Ruth, what does your reporting tell us?
Thanks, John. And also, I just want to thank you for inviting me here today. It's really an honor to be here with this particular group, especially. And it's a great, rich topic. So we have a lot to talk about. You mentioned in your introduction, the nuns who have gotten a ton of attention. And we do know that, self-identified Christians are a shrinking part of the population. I think down maybe 60 some percent now, down from 3/4 a decade or so ago. But I think, my big sweeping answer to your question is that, the shape and the definitions of religion are changing right now. And there's a big sort of re-scrambling and realignment going on right now that, frankly, I don't know the outcome of. I mean, I can't look into the future. But I know, some of the most obvious markers of what it means to be religious in 2022 are not, or to be religious are not as relevant as they once were. So things like membership in a house of worship, involvement, attendance. Those things have declined pretty dramatically. We're not quite post-COVID, but the numbers are still way down, and it really remains to be seen if we'll get a full bounce back there. Theological differences are just not as salient as they once were. So, there's a lot of, on the right, far right Catholics making connections with conservative evangelicals, which, a few decades ago would have been pretty unheard of to see. I'm thinking even, over the course of COVID, someone like John MacArthur, like a conservative Reformed pastor, kind of making the same calls that charismatic, a lot of charismatic churches were making in terms of really insisting on staying open. So just new allegiances, labels changing, young Protestants not really using the term Protestant anymore. So there's a big re-scrambling going on right now, but I would argue, and it might be a little bit of a self-serving point, but that religion, especially with that religion, faith, and values, that those things are just as relevant as they always have been. We just have to look at them in a new way.
Look at faith and values in a new way. Jim, what do you think is most important or least understood at this moment in faith, politics, and policy?
Well, what a great conversation and what a great crowd you got today. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to put those two together. What is the most important and least understood? At our opening for this new Center on Faith and Justice, we had Senator Raphael Warnock and Congresswoman Terry Sewell, who are leading the battle on voting rights on the Hill, but they're believers, and they talk to a packed crowd of students with lots of energy about how votes are precious, voting is precious, and how voting rights is a moral issue, a spiritual issue, and a theological issue, not just a partisan one. Now, because one party is doing voter restriction laws all over the country, made it a part of their party platform, and the other party is fighting it, it looks like a partisan issue. But they were saying, as political agents, but also people of faith, how this really is, if you believe what we say we believe about all human beings made in the image and likeness of God, this is a faith issue. A test of democracy, to be sure, but also a test of faith going forward, as Ruth was talking about. How does faith go forward now? This is going to be one of those critical questions that will be a test of faith. And a new generation was in the room. Some would be, a lot of them were nuns, N-O-N-E-S. But there they were, how faith, it will be tested by. So we almost need, I would say, voter suppression based on skin color, which is what this is targeted to be, is really an assault on Imago Dei, assault on the image of God. So what we need is really an Imago Dei campaign on voting rights. And to talk about faith in that sense is what I hope we can discuss today.
Angela, you and I are the token Catholics on our panel. What do you think is most important? You're in Indiana, you're not in Washington. What do you think is the most important or least understood factor right now?
I'll answer both. The least or the most misunderstood factor is that faith does belong in politics. A lot of people want to say that, there should be a separation of church and state. And we have an obligation to be involved. We used to say as Catholics, and we still say, that we want to bring morality into the public forum. And I hesitate to use the word morality because we could have a messy conversation about whose morality. I mean, you would hope that that would be a truism, that what is moral is moral. But instead, I would like to focus on bringing empathy into the public forum. Because if you bring empathy in and infuse that into the public forum instead of politics and being partisan, there's a lot that we can do. We could, with empathy, we could welcome immigrants. We could take care of the sick. We could see the value of all people and be anti-death penalty. We could treat people like brothers and sisters if we infuse empathy into it, and also remember that faith has a place in politics.
Our friend DJ Dion had a hat, I think it was red, but I'm not sure, that said, "Make America empathetic again." Maybe that's one of our messages. Reverend Herring, what do you think is the least understood or most important?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that the panelists ahead of me have given wonderful and sufficient and thoughtful answers. But let me first thank you, John, for inviting me into this conversation and the conversation with such an esteemed group. And to the 1,600 people or so who signed up, God bless you. We hope that this conversation will be edifying to you. And to the thousands who are probably going to lean in through social media, we hope that this conversation will help you figure out what we're all trying to figure out, and that is the role of faith in politics. So what is the most interesting and the most misunderstood? Maybe they are united, as Jim was trying to suggest. I think that what is the most interesting and the most understood is, how do you find your moorings? How do you find your moral anchors? How do you find your place, a moral place where you can stand on your faith and the principles that you derive from your faith in a world that presents such compelling and sometimes heart-rending chaos? And I think this is the challenge for people of faith, is how do we locate ourselves in the great maelstrom that is swirling about us? How do we find a way to understand the pandemic in ways that bring people closer to us and not push them away? How do we understand the other great moral issues of the day, like racism and white supremacy, like violence here and around the world, like feeding all of God's children, like defeating poverty and taking care of the environment? How do we do that as people of faith, as moral actors who are searching for ways to bring their moral sensibilities, their principles that they derive from their faith into this very important public space where we each have an obligation and a responsibility to do our share, to do our part? I think this is interesting. I think this is challenging. And I think that, people are looking to people like us and others for some answers. And I can't confess to have any bolts of lightning in my quiver today that would provide answers for all of that. I think the thing that Angela was trying to suggest as she was lifting up empathy is that we have to find ways to get engaged with one another in deeper conversations than we've been in up to now. And the conversations that are really high stakes conversations that really offer us an opportunity to stand with one another, love one another, see one another, and reason with one another towards the common good. And I think that's interesting. I think it's misunderstood about how to do that in such a chaotic world, but it is a challenge in front of us. And I think that we have to prove ourselves to be up to that challenge.
Thank you, all of you. Let me violate the rules of the moderator and just suggest one other surprising or sad thing that maybe we can talk about later. What has surprised me is that the child tax credit, its expansion and refundability, which was the centerpiece of the response to COVID, lifted people out of poverty, helped the poorest people, is disappearing without a trace. It stopped in December, and now it was a centerpiece of the Build Back Better bill, and now it looks like it might not be a part of it. And that is a pro-family, pro-child, pro-life measure, and the religious community is trying to lift it up, but I'm afraid it could well be lost in the polarization of our moment. Let me go back to being moderator. Ruth Graham. Ruth, you're really interesting in that you work for the New York Times, you live in Dallas, you went to Wheaton College. I want to answer the question everybody asked. You are not related to Billy Graham.
I'm not, sorry to say.
Well, Wheaton has produced some of the best religious reporters of our generation. Elizabeth Diaz at the New York Times. I just loved the piece you and Elizabeth did on the Eucharist for Catholics, not as a political battle, but as a source of faith and strength. You showed real understanding for who we are and what we believe as two Wheaton graduates. You've covered COVID, you've covered the bishops in Biden, you've covered abortion extensively. I want to ask you, what does your reporting, build on what you said earlier, tell us about how religious values, voices, and voters are being reflected this year, a year after the inauguration, a year before the election? Where do religious voters and values fit?
Thanks for that, John. Yeah, that communion story is a good example, I think, of how I try to think about faith and politics as a reporter. Reporters kind of have national politics blinders on a lot of times, where, that lens is not the lens that the vast majority of believers of any kind necessarily describe or, interpret their own faith lives. So, we put Biden versus the bishops on A1, and that's not a problem. I think it belongs there, but it's also insufficient. And that kind of gets back to what I was saying in my first answer, where I think one of the big storylines right now with faith and politics is this big realignment. I mean, the religious right looks so different than it did even 10 years ago. It's not Ralph Reed. I don't know if it was Ralph Reed 10 years ago even, but it's not even characters like that. It's not in Washington. That's part of the reason I'm really glad to be out in Dallas. It's much more grassroots. You're seeing the rise of media figures and pastors who, 5 years ago, I probably would have described as fringe and argued to my editors that we shouldn't cover and, they're not representative, and suddenly have these huge followings nationally and huge influence. So, my reporting on the vaccine issue specifically, I'll talk about, which has just become this massive, almost, it's certainly political, but it's so much more. I mean, it almost is like a new religion of its own, this anti-vaccine movement. And, I did this story about religious exemptions and Christians who were strongly opposed to the vaccine, and specifically to vaccine mandates, and were really, activated on this level. But, as everyone here knows, major religions, major denominations, major traditions, I mean, there's almost no meaningful institutional objections to vaccines anymore, even from sort of the traditional, smaller, Jehovah's Witnesses, the groups that you might think of. So this is coming from somewhere else. And yet you see believers describing this in terms of their own faith and making arguments that this should be, that this is a religious issue for them. And what they're doing is finding faith leaders online or of smaller communities and, in their own areas to basically sign the paperwork for them to help them get out of it. And I was so struck by the interviews I did during that story, where even people like Franklin Graham, Robert Jeffress, the big, pro-Trump Republican pastors, the kind of voice of mainstream kind of Trumpy evangelicalism, they were for vaccines. So it's even busting out of, even those lines are getting kind of re-scrambled and reinterpreted, and new authorities coming into that faith space. And I think that's something, we have a president right now who is arguably one of the most kind of openly religious, practicing a real true practicing Christian. And it doesn't seem to be, there are vast swaths of this country that don't believe it. So, we're just seeing a lot of, scrambling along those lines right now.
As you know, within the Catholic community, there's a debate, particularly related to the president's abortion policies. I'd like to keep going down that road. What do you see the dynamics among religious communities, religious voters? Biden won in part because he got more white Catholic votes and a few more evangelical votes. Trump seems to see his base as heavily evangelical. What are the dynamics within the parties? Do the Democrats take religion seriously? Are the Republicans focused in large measure on the evangelical community? Well, we say religion should be partisan, but it seems like the parties are focused on what's going on with religious communities. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what other people, if we really want authorities on the religious left, we have some great voices on this call, but or on this panel. Democrats, there's such a robust movement in the religious left right now, an incredible vibrancy, interest from outside. The Poor People's Campaign, you have members of Congress who are ordained and who, speak openly about that. So Raphael Warnock, really speaking in this tradition of faith-based activism and making, pro-choice arguments from that position of faith. And I think there's definitely still room for that. And those voices are heard and respected within the Democratic Party. I also think, a part of that is also just the historic importance of the Black church in the Democratic Party. And that, I don't think is going away anytime soon. But at the same time, you do see, some, I think, more open kind of hostility or resistance to religion on the left. Or just lack of resonance, with it, where some of the language just doesn't have the same power across the board that it used to. I think about 1 in 3 Democrats right now is a nun. And so that's a real challenge for the Democratic Party. You're right that Biden held on to that white Catholic vote too. But it was, it wasn't a landslide. It wasn't like that identity was, completely flipped that voter block. And then if you look at Latino Catholics, first of all, a lot of Latinos leaving the Catholic Church, some, becoming nuns, but some becoming evangelical and turning a little more, conservative than I think a lot of people expected looking at that cohort. That used to be that was the great hope that once this demographic change happens, the Democrats will be all set. And that's not really how it's played out. So there you go. I didn't get to Trump.
Yeah.
We'll have more time.
We'll come back.
Yeah.
The idea that lots of Latinos are becoming nuns has a different ring to it today. Alvin, Reverend Herring, part of what Ruth was describing was a grassroots movement on the right. You're not a Washington figure. You're up in Baltimore, but you lead a national movement of local community organizations. Most of your work is done in church basements, empowering people to make their voices heard on immigration, on healthcare, on voting rights. You come to this with a varied background in philanthropy and higher education, but mostly you've been trying to help people put their faith to work in everyday life to make their communities better. What's your take as somebody who works at the ground level about what's right and what's wrong with religion and politics in 2022?
Wow, great question. And make a great sermon topic too. It's a great question. I think there's a fundamental challenge here. And I think based on the remarks that members of this panel have given already, it suggests to me it's a challenge that each of us are trying to figure out, both professionally, maybe even personally as well. And that is, what is the interplay between what we learn and what we know through our faith and how to apply that to the issues and challenges that we face and that so many of our brothers and sisters face, that we face as a country, that faces a world? What's the way to connect those two? And I don't think anyone claims to know exactly how it gets done. But I came to understand God through the Christian tradition. And as a young boy growing up, trying to understand what all this faith conversation was like, I found that when I read the Gospels, particularly the Gospel of John, where I could meet Jesus in a very personal way, I understood that there was really in the way in which we go about taking on the challenges of the world, there was really very little division between what we believe and what we must do as citizens or what we must do as people who care about other people. In other words, the conversation about what is faith and what is politics was not nearly as starkly drawn, I would suggest, as it is today. So for me, as you approach the challenges that we have, the question is not, are people of faith, do they see themselves as political actors? The question is, how do you bring your faith to take on the challenges that you must take on as a citizen, as a person, as someone who cares about their family or cares about their community? It must happen. You must find that way. And as we look at the two parties in this country and look at how people determine their political allegiance, I think that many people do determine their political allegiance based on how they would want their faith to guide them and to direct them. Therein is all the challenge, that we can read the same wisdom book, like in the Christian case, the Bible, and come to important political issues in very different ways. We can read the great text and say that an eye for an eye would give us justification to support capital punishment, And we can read the great text that says that we must love everyone, forgive every sinner as Jesus did on the cross, and work to disallow capital punishment. And so we can come to the world of politics through our faith, but be prepared. We must be prepared that doesn't mean that the questions become easier or that our relationships become easier. It means that we have to commit to the kind of dialogue and the kind of working together that we see very little evidence of these days.
Boy, you described the challenge. I'm really intrigued because Faith in Action, used to be called PICO, is all over the country, East Coast, West Coast, South, Midwest. What are you working on as you read the scriptures and you practice what Angela talked about, empathy? What is the agenda for Faith in Action today? The other thing I want to point out for our group, we have mostly Catholics on, not exclusively, but you may be an AME minister, but you have Catholic roots and Catholic education. So we're going to claim some credit for your good work. But how do you put together the principles of the scriptures, the experience of people into an agenda in a polarized politics?
First of all, you're absolutely right, John. I came to understand God, the divine, through my experience in the Catholic Church. Went to Catholic grade school, middle school, high school, got my master's degree from Catholic University, went to Catholic seminary, but I'm an AME minister. So figure that out. I want to go back to something that Angela said, because it really, I think, is the very provocative question that she was kind of asking through her commentary, and I would support it. And that is, we figure these issues out at Faith in Action based on one overriding, superriding principle, and that is the principle of love. Now, I know that your audience and many audiences feel that they've heard all they need to hear about love, and that they come away wanting something much more solid and much less ephemeral. But let me tell you that the doctrine of love is a very solid doctrine that has political implications. So if we are required to love our neighbor as ourselves, that means we are required to consider in every way possible the life and the experience of those who are new immigrants to this country, who may be without the benefit of citizenship. If we're required to love our neighbor as ourselves, then we must consider those who are incarcerated, coming home from incarcerated, and their families and their children who are in the middle of that experience. If we are required to love our neighbor as ourselves, then we must find ways to talk to one another across religious lines, across racial lines, across gender, sexuality lines. We must find that way and make our way forward based on that. If we are required to love our neighbor as ourselves, that means we're required to surrender our political designations where it matters most, surrender being Democrat, and surrender being Republican, and look at the face of poverty in this country. There's a guy who has a bumper sticker on a car outside of my window here. He says, the only war we're winning is the war on the environment, right? We are required to look at that, to treat that challenge based on our commitment to love one another, love the earth, love our Lord. And when we fail to acknowledge that that is our first and foremost public responsibility, we give ourselves too many excuses to do what is good and what is necessary, let alone what is right. And that's what we're learning in our work across the country and in all these big towns and small towns. And by the way, we're working in 4 countries internationally as well. But that is what we're learning, that the people have a love agenda, and they're waiting for the rest of us to figure that out, particularly those in political leadership, and begin to act towards it. And politically in this country, we're lurching like an old jalopy down the road, swinging right sometimes and swinging left sometimes, but asking, can someone keep us in the middle of the road? Can someone bring us together here and keep the car going forward in the direction towards our highest ideals? And that's the challenge. That's what we're trying to figure out. Now, I suspect everyone's trying to figure that out, but we have to acknowledge that that's the challenge. The doctrine of love gives us no excuses. We get no out. We must act as moral beings, and we must do it based on that principle.
That's powerful. Angela, Alvin talked about a love agenda. You talked about an empathy agenda. You have a different perspective in that You represent the Catholic Church in Indiana. My recollection is Indiana voted for Barack Obama and Donald Trump. Ruth talked about the religious left, the religious right. To be fair to say, nobody's thought of the bishops of Indiana as religious left or right. You work every day. I looked at your website. You have action alerts on abortion, on climate change, on driver's licenses for immigrants, on predatory lending that's destroying families. You sort of represent the Catholic and human life and dignity, solidarity and subsidiarity. The one thing that struck me, look, the federal death, the bishops of Indiana wrote President Trump when he reinstituted the death penalty and said, don't do this. And part of it was because the executions take place in Indiana. So you represent sort of a consistent commitment to life and dignity. How do you put that together when in our church, in our country, people are trying to tear those apart?
Walk a fine line, to say the least. And you're right, a lot of it is based in Indiana, but also federally. Matter of fact, right after this call, the Catholic Social Ministries Gathering is speaking with Senator Braun, as well as staffers from Senator Young's office to talk about federal issues. We try to remind people of Catholic social teaching, and not just for Catholics. Think of Catholic with a small c and the universal approach, because the foundation of Catholic social teaching are things that work for everyone: support for the common good, respecting the dignity of life, solidarity, or you could say empathy instead of solidarity, subsidiarity, care for creation and the planet and its resources, and respecting the dignity of life. Some people, say sometimes glibly, from womb to tomb. And that's one of the reasons why the bishops wrote to President Trump, because in a 6-month time period, there were 13 executions at the federal institution in Terre Haute. And that takes a toll on the people of Terre Haute, the victims' families, the families of those who are on death row. And that's why, even though the Indiana Catholic Conference works primarily with the lawmakers in Indiana, we are also advocating that the proposed bill in Congress, on the Senate side as well as the House side, the federal prohibition against the death penalty, we're asking people to support that. We want people to not only be empathetic, but also to remember to respect life, all life. And in Indiana and in a lot of conservative places, for some people, that generally means they're anti-abortion. And we want them to broaden their perspective on what that means to respect life. When you respect life, you're not just against abortion. You respect life in its full bloom. And that means, working for a living wage. That means, helping those who were incarcerated. That means welcoming the immigrants. It's so broad. That's also why here in Indiana, we're trying to join other states to fight back what people call constitutional carry, where you can have a handgun without a license. Because we know in places where they don't have background checks and licenses, suicides go up and homicides with handguns go up, and that takes away life. And so we try to impress upon people that you have to have empathy, and you also have to truly respect life in all its forms.
Let me throw you a bit of a curveball. You work for bishops, but you're a laywoman. You're an African-American laywoman. You come out of higher education. Ruth talked about authorities, different kinds of authorities. In the Catholic community, we look to our bishops and our Holy Father. What is the responsibility of lay people at a time like this?
The responsibility of lay people is to put their faith in action. That could be by speaking up, definitely by voting, helping to protect the votes of those whose power is being threatened. You can't just, and for some people, go to church on Sunday, or even those who might go more than once a week and rely on that. You have to put it into action.
Struck by your challenge to those of us who are pro-life to remember all life. It's also true for some of my progressive friends to think about the humanity of the unborn child, which it's hard to have a conversation these days on the left. One of the people who has raised that is Jim Wallace, my friend. Introducing Jim is a fun thing for me. We've been friends and allies forever. I resent him. One time, my daughter Kelly, I had sent her one of Jim's books, and we had dinner, and she said, this was when I worked for the bishops. She said, how come the bishops can't talk like Jim Wallace? And I tried to explain the differences. But Jim has been a prolific author, a great advocate. He's a leader. One of the things he leads is the Circle of Protection, which has just done extraordinary work in speaking up for the least of these in the budget process. He has come to Georgetown now, and he runs a Center for Faith and Public Life. We run the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought in Public Life, Faith and Justice. We got those words straight. He runs the Center for Faith and Justice. We run the Initiative for Catholic Social Teaching in Public Life. We have distinctive but complementary roles. We're both trying to bring the wisdom of our faith into public life. What has been the message of the Circle of Protection? What are its priorities? What is at stake in 2022?
Well, thank you, John. When the two most important words in your life, faith and justice, are now at share in a center, makes you a happy camper. So I'm very grateful to be here. You and I have talked about how the Circle of Protection, how Build Back Better and voting rights have failed in Washington, failed to pass. Let me start by saying, when Washington has so clearly and massively failed on two questions where moral issues, as we've already said, are deeply at stake. When politics fails, faith communities have to intervene. I'm going to go back to Angela here. The separation of church and state does not require the segregation of moral values from public life. And let's admit, religion doesn't have a monopoly on morality. And what the nuns, I love the nuns, the NONES, the nuns are looking for is who's showing courage on what they call values questions. So the faith community, being people of faith, what we don't do when there's failure is to say things are over or dead or done. We say, okay, what are the next steps? So, and I think a lot of this now is going grassroots. Al's grassroots, I love his organization. We have a campaign now, it's called FACE, plural, to Save Democracy. We'll put the link in the chat. We're in 10 states, and we're talking about key things we're doing as faith leaders. We are multi-faith, we're multiracial, and now multi-generational. That's what we're doing. Barbara and Skinner is my tag team partner in all of this. This is an amazing campaign now going on around the country. And basically, how do you educate? How do you register? How do you provide IDs? Practical, Al. How do you mobilize and protect the vote? This is a campaign now that is deeply theological, but very practical in 10 key states. And on circle protection on poverty, you're right, I'll echo John here. Child tax credit, we had a White House meeting, and I could say in the meeting, Catholic bishops and the National Association of Evangelicals were both in the room, all supporting CTC. That says something about common values, which was Al talking about. When people see us acting on values that they think are important, that's critical. So we're going to say when the child tax credit has already cut child poverty by 40%, we can't let that disappear or go away. So childcare, expanding Medicaid, pre-K, CTC, these things most directly impact economic equality and racial disparities. So we will press and press and press that those not be left out and left behind. So we're going to intervene when our values are at stake and when politics has failed.
Jim, one of the reasons my daughter likes your book is you have great titles. And I remember the subtitle of God's Politics is Why the Right Gets It Wrong and the Left Doesn't Get It. And Ruth talked about religious right, religious left. I'm talking secular right and left. Who gets religion? Who does not get religion? How might that play out? Who's paying attention to our values and our voters in this year of legislative choices and with an upcoming set of decisions on election day in November? How come the right doesn't get it and the left doesn't get it and the right gets it wrong?
That subtitle still draws oohs and ahs in audiences. It's still true, more true now than ever. Ruth was right. And I think earlier, John, you said our faith should shape our politics and not the other way around, which is why I don't even like the term religious left. It's making our faith binary. It's politicizing our faith. I like to say, don't go right, don't go left, go deeper, deeper into those values. I'm looking at what's at stake here, which is literally the soul of the nation, which means who will evoke and what will evoke our better angels, as Lincoln said, or our worst demons. Now, I would say that social media with its algorithms that lead to conflict and hate and violence, the algorithms of profit lead to conflict. Social media and Donald Trump both appeal to our worst demons. So who will appeal to our better angels? That's what I think we have to talk about now. And I think it's going to be how, and the nuns turn out for classes on faith, race, and politics and voting rights as a faith issue. The nuns are all over the place. They care about what we think faith means and what we say it means and what we do. Most of them believe in God. They don't want to affiliate with religion because of what we do and don't do and don't say. So history is looking on us right now. And back to 1860, we're trying to decide are slaves human beings or not? We're doing that again now with whether we care about a multiracial democracy or not. Or as my mentor, Vincent Harding says, is America possible or not? And a new generation wants to commit to that. So how we act in those ways will decide whether the nuns care or not about religion and faith and come back to church or not.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I just want to make clear the other nuns, the Roman Catholic sisters, have been leaders on all of this. So maybe the nuns and the nuns have something in common. Let me go to questions, and we have several. Interestingly, two of them echo what I was going to ask Dr. Moore about. It's important to remember Dr. Moore was pushed out, resigned from the Southern Baptist Convention, not because of what he said about Trump, but because he stood up for survivors of sexual abuse and because he kept emphasizing the need for racial justice and reconciliation. Where does overcoming racism fit in a faithful agenda right now? We've talked a lot about voting rights, but it's broader than that. Secondly, Dr. Moore said a lot of the people who left religion did so not because they were drawn by secularism, but because they were pushed away by religious people. Our friend Guthrie Graves Fitzsimmons asked, do you think the dominance of the religious right in our public imagination has led moderate and progressive Christians to stop self-identifying as Christians. Let me ask Ruth, you've reported a lot on the nuns and the people leaving and who stays. Why don't you deal with that second one? And I'd ask others to take your pick, but we got to go deeper, to use Jim's word, about racism and a faithful agenda. So Ruth?
Yeah, this question of self-definition is so challenging to me as a reporter because, there are so many people who I would describe as, for instance, evangelical or Protestant. And then when you ask them, you want to use people's own self-definitions and they're like, no, well, it's complicated for me. And so, yes, it is clearly a tremendously complicated question for a lot of people. Yes, I do think that, the sort of dominance of Trump-style Christianity is pushing people who are more moderate or on the left to, redefine, maybe leave these communities, but also even just sort of change the way they describe their own relationship to faith or not. But I also want to point out that, over the course of the Trump presidency, you have a lot of white people who supported Trump start to call themselves evangelicals over the course of the presidency. So, there's a lot of attention to people, paid to people leaving evangelicalism, leaving Christianity. But you actually had more white people, at least, start to, become evangelical. Now, again, what does that mean? It doesn't seem theological in this case. It doesn't necessarily have to do with church attendance, but it does have to do with self-definition, which is meaningful. And so there's sort of changes in both directions here. And I think that's going to be a real sea change. And, that is also accelerated by COVID, of course. So a lot of people leaving for reasons that aren't political, but have some connections to political, to politics. So which churches reopened quickly, which waited, which really made the case for being in person. And, those conversations are obviously continuing and incredibly fraught. But a lot of that, some people are moving into the bucket at the same time that other people are leaving. So we'll see how all those numbers shake out, but it's a great question.
Ruth mentioned that, there were people on the left who might have left and stopped calling themselves evangelical. There were a lot of evangelicals who were on the right because Trump's brand of Christianity didn't align with their traditional views. And then as far as people leaving, or people joining and now calling themselves evangelical, is it political, or does it go back to your first question about race? I mean, there were instances where it wasn't even a dog whistle that Trump used. And that base sentiment appealed to a lot of people, and they felt okay because they could wrap religion around it.
Jim or Alvin?
I think Angela's right on with that. And I think Ruth's comments are also very insightful. It comes as no surprise, what I'm about to say, in that America has a race problem. And every institution and every way in which we try to conduct public life is impacted by America's race problem, or even being more specific, by the failed logic of white supremacy. And that would mean our politics as well. And so there are folks who have an agenda with respect to racism and white supremacy, who would look for any way in which to express that agenda, and looking for anyone who's thinking like they're thinking becomes really easy then. And I think it is a real challenge for many people who may have very conservative political views, right? But feel that they are people of strong faith, but who don't identify with what has happened in the country as relates to this rise and resurgence of white supremacy and the kind of freedom to be overtly racist in the way in which one conducts one's life. We used to use the term dog whistle to suggest that people are in very nuanced ways displaying their racism. We should disavow that, and there's nothing dog whistle about what the former president was saying and doing. We used to go around a lot talking about unconscious bias, and I was always asking the question, well, I see plenty of conscious bias. Why are we still talking about that and trying to remedy that? So, yeah, I think that it is a very dangerous moment where people have conflated, right? They've wrapped their perhaps religious expression inside of this envelope that really expresses their darkened heart with regard to race. And we're going to have a hard time teasing that out, and an even harder time trying to be one country.
Jim,
Racism.
you have been a white Christian who's been a leader on racial justice. You have also made the case that preserving democracy has to be a part of our faithful agenda. How do we be prophetic in polarized times? How do we build up the common good when our divisions are so great about democracy itself, about racial justice, about economic justice?
I believe racism is this country's original sin, and it's core to everything that I would just say, all of our systems, all of our structures. It's also going to be the test of faith. On the big insurrection day, the big lie is what we all talk about, that an election was stolen when it wasn't. The bigger lie, underneath the big lie, was the lie of racism. White Christian nationalism is a powerful movement in this country. It's being evoked by many of the people that Ruth was referring to. And so whether or not we stand for democracy, what it is for us is whether we believe or not that God created us all humans equal in God's image or not. And democracy, that's what's at stake. And voting rights will be the test of that. My students, I asked them, white students, have they ever heard a sermon in their home white pulpits on racism? Ever? And almost all of them say no, which means if racism is our nation's most core sin, most white Christians have missed America's leading sin. Russell Moore spoke up to white Christianity. White Christianity, that phrase is an idolatry. We created white Christianity. Going back to what the gospel says is going to be the test of faith in our time, whether voting rights, whether our preaching, whether our talking about the Galatians text about all of us coming together, which is taken out of the slaveholders' Bible at Fisk University. This is going to be the test of our times for faith, not just for democracy, but for our faith. That'll be the test. And all the young people are watching to see how we respond to that test of racism as a matter of faith in our time.
Angela.
You know, it's often said to fix a problem, you have to first acknowledge it. And we haven't acknowledged it because people think that racism is something of the past. People don't believe there's institutional racism. But in addition to, the affronts on voting rights, there's also now these bills that are going across the country that relate to education so that you can't teach history appropriately for fear of making white children feel bad. If people don't know history, how can we fix it? And so we have a lot of problems that we need to address. And even though a lot of these laws don't affect private schools the way that they've been written, private schools, Catholic schools need to speak up and say that these things are wrong. Catholic conferences across the state, when I asked some of my fellow directors, how are you approaching the issue of voter suppression? Well, here or there. It's like, how can we ask people to advocate and contact their lawmakers if we let the power of the vote being taken away from them? So we have a lot of work to do on a lot of different levels.
We're at the end of our time.
It's February 5th. It's February 1st, the start of Black History Month. On this day, the start of Black History Month, all over the country, Black history teaching America's being banned all over the month. On February 1st, Black History Month, we're banning Black and American history from being taught, just as Angela says.
Yeah. It's going backwards in some ways. A lot of the remaining questions have to do with practical steps. How do you dialogue with people who have different views? How do you apply principles to specific issues? Let me ask you a concluding question and a different one for Ruth. For the three of you, You're one of the 1,600 people out there. You've listened to this and you say, what's one thing I could do to make sure to try to have my faith shape my politics instead of the other way around? And I'll go, let's go with Jim first, Angela, and then Alvin, and then Ruth. Give us a preview. What should we be looking at in terms of faith, politics, and policy between now and the November elections? So, Jim, what can somebody do to make sure their faith shapes their politics?
Well, practically, I think people of faith need to come out, speak up, stand up when these issues are coming to the public, like in voting rights. People are going to look back the pulpit test, whether white preachers speak about voting rights in their pulpits or not. That'll be a test. White preachers, white Christians can stand up around the country with the Black and brown brothers and speak on behalf of voting rights, which is to say we are in favor for a multiracial democracy.
Angela? Angela?
I'm here. Sorry about that. First of all, I think people need to keep listening because a lot of times it's easier to tune out because it is so divisive. So don't give up and keep listening and pray. Pray for leaders. Pray that when you approach a situation that you're not approaching it from a partisan point of view. Years ago, I had the privilege of meeting a Methodist minister from Boston who had gone down to Atlanta to work with Dr. Martin Luther King. And he asked Dr. King, how do you keep doing what you're doing? And Dr. King said every day he prayed a prayer that those with hearts of stone would be turned to hearts of flesh. And that's what we need. To me, that's another way of asking that those people be empathetic. Pray for yourself and pray for those people who don't see things the way that you see them also.
Alvin?
I think one of the things that Jim has been saying throughout this conversation is that people of faith must be present and must have their presence felt on the important social and political and economic issues of this moment. Voting rights is a great example of that. I think what people of faith need to do now in order to practically apply the virtues and the values of their faith is to get into the conversation. You can do it through the vote. That's one way, but there are many other ways. Dialogue with those around you, dialogue with your elected and appointed officials. But I think the first thing that people of faith have to do is they have to see themselves as absolutely critical to this moment. These important questions will be resolved by all of us if we are engaged. But if we're not, they will be resolved by some of us. And the some that will resolve them will, frankly, not represent the hopes, aspirations, and needs of everyday people. So that's what's at stake. We've got to get better invested, better educated, better organized, and better involved.
Ruth, what should we look for between now and November in terms of faith, politics, and policy?
Okay. I'm in Texas, so I have abortion on the brain this year, as really does everyone else. It was one of the biggest storylines of the year last year, and of course this year with Dobbs coming up before the Supreme Court. It's just going to be at the forefront of a lot of these conversations, again, on both the left and the right. So I'll be looking at who that motivates. Again, on the left and the right, what does that conversation look like, given that American views on abortion are actually quite complex and nuanced, but it's also super motivating on the left and the right. So that conversation will be really interesting to watch, and then how that impacts November. And I'm also looking at what Trumpism, including evangelical Trumpism, looks like in an election without Trump. He's around, he's making appearances, he's endorsing, but he won't be on the ballot. And so it'll be interesting to see, what that election looks like and how we see kind of those instincts that he activated, that kind of language, trickle down into faith rhetoric going into the fall elections, and how do faith leaders, including especially of conservative communities, kind of walk that tightrope and push back and suffer the consequences of that, or hang back and see if they can ride it out. So a lot of people have some kind of tough decisions, that they'll continue to face this year.
Thank you. The initiative's last dialogue focused in a remarkable way, I can say that because I wasn't a part of it, on the challenges for the pro-life movement. And that video is available on our website. One thing I want everyone to do is say a prayer for Dr. Moore and his family, a great pro-life, social justice, racial reconciliation leader, and like so many people dealing with this disease. The question for us is, how do we as believers and citizens use the opportunities of our democracy and of our faith to build a better world, build better communities? We have 4 people who do that every day through journalism, organizing, advocacy, and leadership at the state level. I want to thank Kim Daniels and Anna, I still call her Misla Gordon, she's married, for their great work on this. I want to call your attention to the fact that you'll be getting word on 3 dialogues we're doing. One is on faith politics in the Latino community for our young Latino leaders, our annual Francis Factor dialogue, and a Dahlgren dialogue on the legacy of Sister Thea Bowman, one of the real nuns, and the call to overcome racism and other things this fall. I want to especially thank our colleagues here who have stepped up in a tough time, given us a little bit of hope and a lot of challenge. So thank Jim Wallace, Angela Espada, Alvin Herring, and Ruth Graham. And I thank you for joining us.